episode that almost was completely scratched was The Outing, because of the fear of, it coming across as offensive. The original table read for The Outing was receiving a lot of, negative feedback, whenever they did the table read. And that's when Larry and Jerry decided to just, shut down that episode and just, fix it. There were some executives that thought maybe it's best to not even do that episode, but then there was one line that just like solved all those problems, and it was used I think 8 times in the episode, and it was not that there's anything wrong with that, which they had the hand gestures and the way they said, the way they delivered it, it just had to be on point. Another Larry Charles story where they had to, again, go to like a challenging topic that, at the time was not as talked about as it is today, of course. But to find some way to make sure, it comes across as funny, but also not offensive. And they did succeed, of course. The idea came up because apparently as the show got more and more popular, people started to question, is Jerry straight? Does he swing gay or anything like that? Like, they were questioning it. And Larry Charles thought that that'd be an interesting topic to kind of like, explore in some ways. So the episode starts off, though, with George in his car with his girlfriend Allison. Basically George wants to break up with Allison, but Allison is probably the first girl that George has been with that would rather be dead than that would not want to live if George didn't want to be with her. She thought that it was George or nothing, which of course as everybody would joke with, who would George, like who would want George so bad, basically, is what the joke was. Without, of course, that would probably hurt George's feelings, but it was just, even George was like, geez, who would want me that bad that they would not want to live if they didn't have me? So, of course, they met up at Monk's. Jerry was waiting for a grad student at NYU to interview him for, the school's newspaper. But of course, things just weren't clicking, as far as like, trying to, she didn't even know what Jerry looked like. So they basically, weren't able to, put 2 and 2 together when they were there at Monk's. What they didn't know was that the reporter was actually sitting in the booth right behind them. And as Jerry, Elaine, and George are talking, Elaine can tell that the girl she's sitting with, they're eavesdropping on them. Which, of course, at the time, Jerry did not know that was Sharon Leonard, who was the one he was supposed to be meeting with at the coffee shop to interview him. Since Elaine knew that she was eavesdropping on them, and she told Jerry and George that, she started this joke saying that Jerry and George were in fact in love with each other. And they went on about it. George was playing along with it. Jerry somewhat, but not as much as George, of course, was. But they were just trying to, play a trick on the girls back there. But once again, what they didn't know, though, is that the one girl was the NYU reporter that Jerry was supposed to be meeting with. She even, of course, went to the phone to call Jerry's house and said, "I was late, must have missed you, blah, blah, blah," and all that jazz. So, and of course, Jerry and George also had their pilot script they're coming up. Well, that's getting a little too far. That's in the next episode. I'm sorry. So, anyways, in the next scene, George walks in, and the first thing he does is he tells Jerry, he asks Jerry, "Have I ever told you what my name would be if I was ever a porn star or whatnot, or something like that?" And Jerry goes, "Yeah, buck naked. You told me like 2 months ago." He also asked Jerry what he thought of this shirt. He's just doing he's doing all this stuff because he definitely wants Allison to be turned off by him. He wants to break up with her, but she keeps just crying away, saying that it's George or nothing, basically. But then Jerry said he had talked to that NYU reporter, and said that they decided to just meet at his apartment instead, just to make things easier. And he told him George can stay. She was coming, but of course, little did they know what was going to happen. So she arrives, and of course she knows George is there. Of course she realizes who they are at first, but they don't recognize her at first. So she sits down and starts asking these questions. Jerry and George are arguing over whether a piece of fruit was washed or not. And they start saying other things that just obviously, unintentionally, was not going to help their case to prove that they were not in love with each other. Sharon starts asking these awkward questions. Now, the one I also wonder about was the fact that she said, my boyfriend talks to me like that also, which of course gets to thinking wait, what are you talking about? Now, the thing is, though, is later in the episode, she was getting on with Jerry. So either she said that to get a reaction out of them about the whole, gay thing or something, or she said that because she literally did have a boyfriend and maybe she was cheating on Jerry. Or she was cheating on her boyfriend with Jerry. Or maybe she just broken up and she literally just ran to Jerry out of desperation. I don't know. Anyways, so finally after going back and forth, and the questions Sharon was asking, they finally connected the dots and realized, oh my gosh, you were the one who was sitting at the table, and then she basically was, and George's like, oh no! He starts freaking out the most, and then she gets up to leave, and she goes, I think I better leave. And then they're trying to tell them that, no, we knew you were eavesdropping. We did that as a joke to see if you overhear it. He says the first time he goes, we're not gay. Not that there's anything wrong with that, which I agree too. Not that there's anything wrong with that. And then they said, and they're trying to be reassuring, no, I know plenty of people who swing that way. And of course, George, when he's desperate, he always throws someone else, out there, in The Good Samaritan, whenever Michael asked him, you think you're special? Because he said, God bless you. He says, no, I don't think I'm special. My parents told me I was never special, or something like that. And George flat out said his father was gay too, and I was just and I'm like, George, that's not true. Again, not that there's anything wrong with it, but that's not true. Doing that. So then, Sharon saying I know what I heard, and then George was okay, you want to prove it? Come on, let's go to your room and let's get it on. Come on. She had no interest, and then Kramer just rolls in and goes, as this is gone, goes, hey, Father, we're gonna take a steam. And he's like, no, we're not gonna do that. It's just bad timing, bad luck. Just makes it even worse. So, so what happened then? Oh yes. So also earlier in the episode, before Jerry came to sit down with them at the coffee shop, Elaine and George were discussing what they got for Jerry's birthday. George got Jerry 2 tickets to see Guys and Dolls, which the two of them were going to go together, and Elaine was going to get him a 2-line phone. Well, in the next scene, Elaine's at the apartment, which Jerry's trying. Elaine had a small little sub story where she would not take off her jacket anywhere she was at. People were Jerry, when she went to go see Sharon later, to try to tell her that to prove that they were joking about the whole thing at the coffee shop. People were complaining that she wouldn't take her jacket off, and it was just bugging people. Well, because of all that happening, Elaine said she would go talk to Sharon, which of course did not go well because of the whole jacket thing, and tell her that it's not true. Well, Kramer then gets Jerry a present for his birthday, and it ends up being a 2-line phone, which Elaine realized that, and she goes to take it back, and I think she got him a CD of the best hits of Bette Midler, who would appear in a later episode, in the episode called the Understudy, which I believe is the season finale of season 6. I want to say. I think that's what the season finale for that one was. Um, but of course, Jerry hooks up the 2-line phone, and Kramer goes back over to his apartment to, he wants to be the first call. So he calls, and it works great. Jerry gets a call on the other line, and it was Sharon apologizing, saying she was not going to, publish that angle about about him and George. He goes, okay. He goes, thank you. He goes, oh wait, and he starts calling your line. It's George. So Jerry tells George that she's not going to publish that angle, and for some reason he just said she thinks we're heterosexual. I think we fooled her. So I don't know why he said that, but then he goes back over to to finish up his conversation with Sharon. Sharon wasn't there. So Jerry, this is one of my favorites. This is one of my favorite scenes in the series. Well, one of my favorite parts right here. So Jerry switches back over to George and he goes, "Okay, she's gone." And then George goes, "I can hear you on the other line." And he starts freaking out. He's like, "What? You can hear me on the other line?" He says, "Yeah, I heard you said, Sharon, are you there?" And then he goes, "Well, maybe she was disconnected." And George is freaking out. George starts freaking out. He's like, maybe she wasn't disconnected. Maybe she heard the whole conversation, because he probably heard what he said about saying that they fooled her. And then Jerry says, "Here, let me call Kramer and we'll test it out. Hold on." So he calls Kramer and Kramer answers. And then Jerry goes, "Kramer, maybe a problem with the phone. Hold on." And switches back to George, and George says, "There may be a problem with the phone. Hold on." He's like, "Oh no!" Switches back over. He goes, "Kramer's phone's a piece of junk pie." And switches back over to George, and then George's freaking out again, going, "This phone's a piece of junk pie." And he's like, "Oh no!" So you heard the whole thing. And then again they say, and George says, "Now that she thinks that we're gay, not that there's anything wrong with that." And then all that jazz. But of course, obviously they screwed up again. So they did show when Elaine went over. It showed the full thing of the deleted scene, but it showed that Elaine did go over to Sharon's, but Elaine would take off the coat, and they cut out the rest of the scene, and it didn't work out. But then the next day, that's when the report didn't just go to the NYU newspaper. It went for in every paper in the world basically, and Jerry and George, of course, were humiliated, and they received wrath from their parents. First, Jerry got a call from his mom, and they say, "What led us you to do that way?" And then Kramer, of course, came in, and he was like, he couldn't believe it either. He was stunned by it. George then ran to go see his mom, who had fell off the toilet and her back went out again. And she's saying something again, "I don't know who you are anymore, this and that." And of course, George has to throw out the name he said he'd give himself if he ever was a porn star. He goes, "Yeah, I'm buck naked." And then she's like, "Who? Buck naked?" And at the same time, remember back in the what was the episode on the last disc? The contest. Whenever he would be watching the sponge bath with the two ladies. Well, now George was watching a sponge bath in the next room, but instead it was done by two men. So George had the opposite effect this time, and just no matter what he does, his case keeps getting worse and worse to prove that it's not true. Jerry, of course, does get his presents, the CDs of those Bette Midler CDs from Elaine, and the Guys and Dolls tickets, which then they're at Monk's, and first Jerry had mentioned that Sharon left a message on his machine wondering what she wanted, and then Jerry said he was going to pass, and then a Marine came over and said, "Your article inspired me to do the same thing." And then Jerry was just all fed up with it, and he said that, "I think I'm going to pass on the Guys and Dolls." Of course, with him and George get an argument, they were basically told if they don't settle down, they're going to have to leave. So then George said he would take Elaine. But then George also realized Allison had not read the article yet. And if he's trying to get rid of Allison, he hasn't read the article. When she reads it, and then he says another one of my favorite lines, goes, "I'm out, baby! I'm out!" And he goes running out, excited, knowing that he has a way to get out of this relationship. So he shows Allison the article. But Allison was just cool, your name's in it. And then he's trying to convince her that what's being said is true. But then Allison says, I don't believe it. And she's starting to George saying, I want to hear it from Jerry. But George trying to, say, oh, that's not a good idea. Unfortunately, though, Jerry, was back at his apartment. And this is where him and Sharon were making out. And, they're both admitted they were both attracted to each other immediately, this, and that. Jerry said he reminds her of Lois Lane, so they were obviously getting it on. When George and Allison barge in, George, desperate to get Allison off his back, goes, Jerry, oh my God, what are you doing? You're with a woman! And George is trying to, imply, what he's trying to do here, but it just... Any other time, I'm sure Jerry would have helped George out in some way, but it was literally when Jerry was hitting it off, but also, it's the same one they've already had to convince several times that they were not in love with each other. And she even believed him, and Sharon even asked Jerry for forgiveness for publishing that article, even though the people who are saying that I technically Jerry probably could sue her for posting that, but then of course Sharon had enough of it. She left, and then George is still trying to touch Jerry and hold his hand and whatnot, but Jerry's get off me, would you cut it out? And they start arguing. Allison's finally what's going on? George realizes he's doomed. He goes, all right, fine, not gay. And then he thinks of one last desperate way to get her off his back. He goes, I'm buck naked and I do porno film or something like that. And then Allison was even more intrigued, and George was like, oh my gosh, no! And then Kramer comes by with some guy, and at first they get the idea of is that what we think it is? Then Kramer goes, he's the phone man. Not that there's anything wrong with that, of course. And the episode ends. I like this episode. Again, the whole, not that there's anything wrong with that thing, was, a way to try to, save the problem of having the episode come across as offensive, because they didn't want to offend people who, swung that way, of course. I never want to offend people who swing that way either. But I forgot to mention this earlier. I said how I keep saying there's a lot of, things I like to, take after, of course, on this disc, of course, with the episodes. One idea I got of was there's a little story here. So obviously, again, the whole whole thing started with Elaine pranking those girls, which was Sharon and one or two of her friends at the coffee shop, because Elaine knew that they were eavesdropping on their conversation. So then Elaine starts to come up with the idea of saying something to see if she overhears that. Unfortunately, it did, and it really bit them in the butt. But I think when I was a sophomore in high school, I think it was. Yes, my sophomore year of high school. My best friend and I, who we just became good friends at that time, we were in gym class, and there was a girl that I had really liked. Eventually, I actually went on a couple dates with her. She would there'd be a few times where she would, it was obvious that she was eavesdropping on mine and my friends' conversations. So of course, mature stories, of course. We used to whenever we'd be walking near her, we would always start saying stuff what's that, Mikey? You're setting out like a big herd of tarantulas from your forest or something like that, or something like weird like mature but goofy like that. I got that idea just from the idea of Sharon and her friends eavesdropping on Elaine, Jerry, and George. But just a funny thing to mention there. But like I said, yeah, this episode also almost never happened because, like I said, they were just too afraid to come across as, offensive and whatnot. And, of course, they were never there to offend anyone at all. But I think, they did the right job with it. And, of course, the line, not that there's anything wrong with that, was just a big hit. It's even, of course, the title of any of the blooper reels on any of the seasons. It's called Not That There's Anything Wrong. Not that there's anything wrong with that. But it worked very well. I will also say, ironically, this is not also the last appearance of George's girlfriend, Allison, as she swings the other way in an upcoming episode with another former girl of George's. What will happen there then, though, we'll get to that in a little bit. But guys, that is my review on the Outing episode. Again, good episode, one of my favorites for sure. Next one's also a really good one, And this next one is actually the first episode that aired after Cheers, when Seinfeld moved to 9:30 on Thursday nights and was following Cheers until Cheers finished, and that fall Seinfeld moved to 9 o'clock on Thursday nights. So that'd be a good episode to talk about as well. I'm excited about that one next. So guys, what were your thoughts on the Outing episode? Leave your thoughts down in the comments section below. And be sure as always to slap a like on the video and subscribe for more content on my channel. And follow me on Twitter at DemandAirboy93. Until then guys, I'm checking out. I'll see you guys all in the next video, which again is the shoes. And I'll catch you all then. Peace out everybody.